I just love your fascination with those parking discs. Hey everybody, it's Dick here. This video is the second half of day 2 of our Scotland winter road trip. We started early out of Windermere and we made it to Keswick for a late breakfast. We still had to get up to Glasgow, which was our destination for the night before. We left Keswick with full bellies and high spirits. We hoped the sun would warm the road and make our going a little easier, but it quickly disappeared under heavy fog, which slowed us even more. We had to use our hazard lights to increase our chances of not getting clipped by rushing commuters, who didn't seem all that concerned by the reduced line of sight. Still a half day behind and losing more time after each mile, we aimed for the motorway to try and cover some big miles. The fog lifted as we crossed the Scottish border. The temperature, however, remained at or below 0. Our comms were acting screwy and our GoPro batteries were dying after minutes from replacing them. What we didn't count on, nor had we ever experienced, was the high humidity in the air, especially considering how cold it was. Shakedown and I had grown up in and spent quite a lot of time in cold northern regions of North America, but low temperatures there almost always carry little or no humidity with it. The wet, cold air clung to our helmet visors, Shakedown's windscreen, and the camera lenses. The sun was out and there was little traffic, but the roads were slick with ice. However, we still pressed north. Left alone with your thoughts over long highway miles, it gives you time to reflect on any number of things. Already well into our second day, I was reflecting on our bikes and gear and how they were performing thus far on our trip. Shakedown was riding my 2016 BMW F700 GS. The F700 GS is a sport tourer. It's modeled after an adventure bike. It's a detuned 800cc F800 GS, which you can get an adventure variant for, but the F700 GS has cast wheels and a lower windshield, and I think it's just the kind of adventure light version. It's considerably cheaper versus the F800 GS with the spoked wheels, and I actually prefer cast wheels. In the event that I get a puncture, I can just use a plug as opposed to carrying an extra tube with me, and the amount of off-roading I do doesn't warrant having spoked wheels. The F700 runs 75 horsepower, 800cc engine. It's got 77 newton meters of torque, which is about 57 pound-foot of torque. It's 6-speed, chain-driven. It's a pretty fantastic bike when we think about it. I'm always looking at upgrading it to something a bit more trendy or a bit more characterful, but the features built into the F700 GS we were relying on pretty heavily on this ride, especially the air pressure monitoring and the temperature gauge. We were able to tell when the tires were getting warm and the ambient temperature in the air so that we could determine how fast we can go and when our tires were getting warm and when the road was getting reasonably warm and it was less of a risk for ice. In contrast, the 2018 Triumph Street Cup that I was riding is not designed for touring. With that being said, it did incredibly well on this 2,000-mile ride that we did on it. It has a very minimal windshield. It has a very small petrol tank. I think the fuel efficiency was affected by the heated gear that we were running, but the geometry of the bike and the power distribution is kind of interesting too on the Street Cup, because the Street Cup, although it's a 900cc, so it's a bigger capacity, it's a bigger displacement than the F700 GS, the Street Cup did not perform the way the GS did. The Street Cup it's rumored to have a restricted cam on it, which is something that Triumph is trying to address in its 2019 versions, but for a 900cc bike it only has 54 horsepower and 59 foot-pounds of torque, so compared to the 800cc BMW it doesn't compare. And on the road, it didn't compare either. I mean, a twist of the throttle would have Shakedown just leave me in the dust every time. Shakedown was cruising comfortably with full metal GV Trekker hard boxes on the sides and a Tortec aluminum hardback on the high rack. I had GV waterproof soft bags on Tech Bike Parts pannier rails. The pannier rails did not weather well at all. The chrome had some fault, I think, in it, and by the end of the week I had serious rust and corrosion on the rails. So I was not happy with the finish of the pannier rails. Also, it seemed that although I didn't overpack my bags, and I packed relatively light for this ride, knowing that I was going to be staying in bed and breakfast and hotels, the weight of the bags and the vibrations made the pannier rails bend, and I now have abrasion marks on the top of my rear shocks, which is disappointing as well. Now, although I say the Street Cup performed well over the tour, I have to say that I did feel a bit cramped after a while, and I got a annoying strain or repetitive stress injury in my left knee, and I felt like I was a bit of a bear on a tiny bike in the circus after a while and had to do some stretching on that. I think if I took this on a tour again, which I probably wouldn't rule out, but I would put some maybe crash bars on it and some highway pegs out. I know that would look stupid, but it would definitely help with the comfort over long miles and a long day. What I don't like about the Triumphs, and I've said this before, and I said it in relation to how expensive they are, this bike had less than 500 miles on it, or it had about 500 miles on it before we left for the trip. The trip was about 8 days long. It now looks like it has about 10,000 miles on it, and it looks about 10 years old. I do not like how poorly it's weathered. There's some pitting on the brushed metal parts, and it just looks a bit tired. I've given it a good wash, knowing I was going up into the cold and into places that might have sand or grit, and I was going out in the winter. I put a mineral oil, machine oil finish over all of the parts and wiped it down, but that did not affect the poor finish and the pitting that happened on the metal parts and the exhaust header pipes and the exhaust cans as well. So I'm very disappointed. I mean, I've always been disappointed with how Triumph's weather just sitting out in London parked on the road, and this ride has just kind of accelerated that. I kind of expected it to happen, but I'm still disappointed. I was a bit worried about the tires on both bikes for the cold weather. Each bike ran stock tires from the factory. The Street Cup had the Pirelli Phantom Sports Comp on them, and the BMW had the Michelin Anarchy 3s that came from the factory and were recommended as replacements as well. They're not cold weather tires, and I was worried about both the expense of the trip as well as the other gear that we were collecting made buying new tires for both bikes a bit cost prohibitive. So we went with the hope that they would perform well, and I'll tell you that both sets of tires performed extremely well, and we never had an issue with traction or control in the wet or cold weather. We made it to Glasgow by 1:30 in the afternoon, where we met up with a very special person who brought us over to Lupin Scoop, which is a must stop if you're anywhere near the West End. Shakedown had his first iron brew, and he got his hands on some Scottish cash before we had to hit the road again. The dark was already creeping in around 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we still didn't know how far north we were going to get, how the temperatures and the darkness was going to affect the ride once we got out of Glasgow. It was mid to late afternoon when we left Glasgow, and we were already in what seemed to be commuter traffic or rush hour. We decided to aim our sights towards Loch Lomond and the national park there, which is kind of the gateway up to the Highlands, but we knew as we were approaching the edge of the city that the roads were not improving, the traffic was increasing, and people wanted to get home after their day at work. So it was only going to get worse as it got dark. As soon as the sun dipped behind the mountains to the west, the roads became slick, the temperature dropped below zero, and for some reason the commuter traffic started driving like rally drivers, trying to knock us off the road. We tried a couple of places up along Loch Lomond to find lodging. Most were closed for the season. We found one that asked us to pay £250 for their last suite of the night, which was a bit steep for our prices, seeing as I opted not buying new tires for the bikes. They found us a place a little further up the road, and we got there just as it was getting scary. The sky was still bright to the east. We could see snow-topped mountains and a little bit of evidence of daylight, but the road conditions, the speed of the traffic, the temperatures, it all made for a very harrowing ride for the end of our day. As we were pulling into the inn for the night, people were still tearing by us at breakneck speeds. an accent. I think she said in, but I thought she said and. So I was looking for someone with an A. Bug me. What was that last place called? The Lodge? No, the lodge on Lake Lomond. The place we stopped.
Hi there.
Hello.
Checking in.
I think Natalie from the lodge called.
Yes, the name.
Yes.
Yep,
Thank
she does
goodness.
indeed.
It's funny because I'm getting pretty good at the Scottish, hearing the Scottish accent, but when she said in, I could have sworn she said Anne.
Oh.
So I was looking for someone with an A on it, and I was like, wait, you know what? I think she said in.
She did.
So, yeah.
Right, motorbikes
there's
there.
two motorbikes.
That would be fine.
Motorbikes.
And then just sign and sign for me. Thank you.
And just park out front anywhere?
Yeah, anywhere at all.
I'll just put the makes. And I don't think there'll be other motorbikes, but
That's fine, no
we've
problem.
only seen one other since we crossed the border.
Have you actually? Because you know there's a lot of motorbikes on that road out there. Like we do normally get quite a lot, but
good, because we were getting nervous. We were like, maybe we made a mistake.
It is perhaps a little bit less than normal just because it's so cold now.
It's cool.
But yeah, so many motorbikes out there.
This is an addition. To the right. You go. You got it. What? I'm filming. Which way? Here. Oh God. Eight doors. 4 hallways. 2 flights. For a bargain, £65, we got the presidential suite, which happened to be the farthest room from the front door in the lobby, down some very narrow corridors. The bonus was we had underfloor heating in the bathroom. And while Shakedown freshened up for dinner, I started on my nightly chores. Yes.
Every night. It's a process.
We don't have to stop at dark because of the roads. We have to stop at dark because I have to do this. Notice all the help I'm getting.
I mean, you're doing a great job.
Yes, thank you. That's what keeps me going.
I hand you the things I need charged, and they get charged. It's like a...
You didn't even hand them to me. It was on my side of the bed. Like, it was on my pillow. Like, you can't lay your head down till this thing is charged.
How would you have felt if I didn't hand you the stuff that needs to be charged?
You didn't hand me the stuff that was charged.
If I didn't set it aside in the morning, if you thought I hadn't charged my headset.
I'd feel unprepared.
Exactly.
Exactly. I do think we're going to try and mount these tomorrow because our oh shit faces are going to be worthwhile.
Handlebars.
Yes. What did I say?
Mount these.
Oh.
I was just letting the rest of the world know. Filling in the cracks. We're going to mount this.
We're going to mount this tomorrow. If you like that video and you want to see more like them, hit like, share, and subscribe.